Hey everybody, it's Bust, and today we're going to be doing our patch notes review for the 3.13 patch. And so in today's video, I'm going to break it up into three separate parts. We're going to have kind of a history lesson up front as to why I think these metas break down as they do. Then we're going to jump into the card changes themselves, and then part three will be where I see the meta shaping itself up over the upcoming month. And so, if any of those parts feel interesting to you, feel free to click in the little things. We put that thing in the description that lets you jump across the various parts of the video. If you don't want to hear our history lesson, feel free to jump ahead. But the history lesson itself, I think that kind of breaks into three parts as well. And so, kind of part one of the history lesson is, what is Runeterra actually about? And if we look at the Riot universe of things, you have League of Legends, which is champions doing battle against each other. You have Wild Rift, which is the champions doing battle against each other. You have Teamfight Tactics, which is a collection of champions doing battle against each other. I don't think that's where Valorant falls, but that's probably, in some way, shape, or form, champions doing battle with each other. And then as we switch over into the lands of Legends of Runeterra, that is a card game centered on the champions doing battle against each other. And so, you have to really kind of keep that in your mind as you compare this to other games or talk about it on its own, in that the game should be about these champions doing battle against each other. And so the kind of history lesson piece to go along with this is if you look at Magic, for a long time, that's not what it was about. If we're looking back at the alpha era of Magic, the Richard Garfield envisionment of what this game was going to be, then sure, we had planeswalkers standing at the edge of a battlefield. Those planeswalkers summon a variety of fantasy creatures like bears and demons and dragons and shit. And those bears and demons and dragons and shit run across the battlefield, swipe at each other, and then at the end of the day, punch the opposing planeswalker in the face. And that was, kind of the idea and intent. But throughout Magic's infancy and up into its kind of teenage years, they didn't accomplish that very well. The spells that the planeswalkers were casting were just way more powerful than the units that they were summoning. And then somewhere kind of in the late 2000s or so, maybe in the midpoint of the new millennium, they kind of actively decided, hey, no, this game should be about those units and dragons and demons and shit punching each other in the face, and not so much about Time Spiral untapping all of your land and giving you a fresh hand. And so they made an active decision that the units were going to start being better than the spells. A little bit after that, it looks like given its release in 2011 or so, someone came up with the idea of the Baneslayer Angel conundrum. You want to call it a conundrum? There's something to call it. I don't have the exact word for it right now, but the idea was that if Baneslayer Angel is good in any given format, then it's probably a pretty healthy format. If you're not familiar with what Baneslayer Angel is, to kind of convert it over to Runeterra parlance, it's a 5-mana 5/5 with elusive, quick attack, lifesteal, and then a couple of unit types can't deal damage to it. So you say it can't be dealt damage or blocked by, I don't know, Yordles or Poros, right? That's the kind of idea with Baneslayer Angel. And that lends itself to being good against units. If your opponent is trying to play a fair game, if you will, to where they're attacking with units and dealing damage through combat, then this is in a pretty good space, right? It can shut down those early plays. It can help recover a lot of that early damage that you took. It can help close out the game since it's sort of tough to block with its elusiveness. It's all around a pretty powerful unit in the land of units doing battle for each other. The places where a card like Baneslayer Angel is going to be bad is when your opponent, say, spends 2 mana on a removal spell and kills it. And so we spent our entire turn putting this big, meaty angel on the board. We spent all 5 of our mana on turn 5, and our opponent goes, LOL, here's a terror, and just kills it for 2 mana. It's just not a good deal from that sense. And so at the end of the day, that was kind of the idea. If we're in a format to where there's a lot of cheap and efficient removal, Baneslayer Angel's not going to be that good. But if it's a format where the removal is, say, damage-based or temporary, then, she has the chance to kind of shine. And I think these kind of Baneslayer-esque is good formats is what Riot is really shooting for, right? It doesn't feel that great if your opponent spends 6 mana, they play Sejuani, and you're like, cool, here's a removal spell with 2 mana, a removal spell for 3 mana that just kills your Sejuani. It doesn't feel good, and it really pushes away from this kind of concept of champions doing battle with each other. And so, first and foremost, kind of at the end of part one here, I think that Riot is really shooting to have these unit-based combats. And whether or not you agree or disagree with these thoughts, you enjoy them or don't enjoy them, that's not what we're talking about here. The idea is where I think this is kind of coming from. And so I think we have to kind of keep that in our heads, that Riot wants us to put units on the board. They want those units to interact and get involved with each other in the middle of combat. Okay, and then part two of these concepts is asking ourselves, whose turn is it? Right? If we want to look at a game like chess or a game like Hearthstone, it's pretty straightforward, right? There's only one active player. That player can only do stuff on their turn. If you look at Magic, it's a little bit more varied, right? The active player has a lot more stuff that they can do, but there's a pretty good delineation between who's the active player and who's not, and there's a big advantage to being the active player. As we look at a game like Runeterra, that really kind of falls apart, right? It's not to say that there's anything right or wrong about that. That's just the way that the rules of the games are. And you can do essentially everything your opponent can do on whose, air quotes, turn it is. Just the outside of being the person that acts first and the person getting the attack token, there's not much difference between whose turn it is. And so as we looked at Magic, that caused a lot of the kind of necessity for good spells, if you will. If your opponent gets to attack you with all of their strength and you're limited in what you could do, the only way that you could interact with that strength would be to play spells. And so that kind of really shaped up a lot of the territory in terms of the amount of cheap interaction and the cheap spells and the cheap removal that we could play with, given that your opponent could just kind of overrun you, given the rules of the game. But with Runeterra, and you being able to play units on, kind of whoever's turn it is, the kind of early comparisons to Magic would have been that basically every unit has flash, give you this kind of like different layer of interactivity in what's happening. And so I think in large part, as we're seeing a lot of these nerfs to card generating units and units with kind of spells attached to them, is kind of the acceptance and the understanding that units have a little bit of a different place than they would in a game like Magic. The kind of core concept here would be a thing of virtual card advantage. And virtual card advantage being your opponent has, say, a 1-1 and a 2-2 on the board, and then we play a 3-3. Now, our 3-3 technically cancels both of our opponent's units, given that if they attack into our 3-3, their units are going to fall. And so where that kind of puts us in a spot is it gives another kind of layer for units to be good and to be a little bit better than spells. And then the third piece of the puzzle is the interactivity that Riot has decided to give us, right? As we look back on our previous points, Riot, we feel, has made the decision to make units better than spells. Given the rules of the games, the permanence of units are just better than spells, and that edge that spells used to get, given that you can only play them at specific points of the game, just doesn't exist. So that gives kind of another edge to units. And then the way that Riot is actually designing the spells is kind of part 3 here. If we look at the baseline removal spell being something like Vengeance, costs 6 mana. The kind of board wipes, as we would see from something like a Wrath of God and Magic, cost 9. And the cheaper spells, the ones that we would be able to have to where in that Baneslayer Angel Conundrum, they just aren't permanent, right? So in our Baneslayer Angel Conundrum from earlier in Magic, you play your 5 mana Baneslayer Angel, you play 2 mana Terror, completely remove the unit from the board. The cheap spells in Runeterra we see don't work like that, right? Mystic Shot is limited in that it only deals 2 damage. Something like Wallop is limited in that it's a stun and it's not permanent. Flash Freeze is the same deal to where it removes the power, but it's not permanent. We don't see these cheap catch-all removal spells that could be used to actually come up and trade up in mana. And so that really helps define these kind of go-tall decks, if you will, as to where we're able to play Kaisas, we're able to play Alawis, we're able to play just a singular big super unit, because in Magic, as you invested in that unit, if it just got cheaply removed, you would lose the game, to where here, if you want to cheaply interact with that unit, it's not going to be permanent. And so you do have the tools to shut it down for a little bit, but you don't have the tools to shut it down forever. And so at the end of the day, what I think we have been seeing and what we're going to continue to see with Runeterra is that the aggro decks are going to be here, right? They play units, they fight with each other, the champions come down in battle, they're going to be here. The mid-range decks, they're going to be here as well. They come down, they put units on the board. The units are a little bit slower, then a little bit bigger than the aggro deck units, but they come down and they get the job done and have a nice interactive experience for everyone. But then in Magic, to where you would typically top out with control decks, I don't think we're going to see that. Or maybe that's not entirely an accurate assessment, as much as control decks are just going to look different. They're going to kind of more straddle the line of a combo deck from in the past. And so if we look at a deck like Frozen Thralls, is that a control deck, right? We're playing the board wipes and the blighted ravines, playing avalanches. We're playing the 3/3 dude that heals. We have three sisters. We have lots of these interactive elements in it, but we're just not stalling the game out until turn 11 or turn 12 or turn 13. Why do you need to do that if you can just win the game on turn 8? And so I think that at the end of the day is where we're going to start defining what control decks are, and really having that be what we see closing out these games. And so things like Frozen Thralls control deck, things like whatever you want to call it, Annie Twisted Fate, or the Ravenbloom Conservatory, any of the decks that just stall until they can play Ravenbloom Conservatory, Tybalak, and then into Riptide Rex. Control deck. Even arguably something like Bard Alawi would be in the kind of parlance of a control deck, given that it has, a bunch of removal spells, is just trying to stall out the board, interact a little bit with the various vulnerable cards and the tentacle slams, and then at the end of the day, just winning on turn 8 or turn 9. Why would you try to win on turn 13 when you can win on turn 9, right? And so I think that as you see people bitch that control decks don't exist, I think that they do. And it's just a matter of how we're going to see them in Runeterra. And so I think these formats will kind of continue to expand, right? I think what we'll start to call mid-rangey decks are going to be the go-wide decks. And then what I think we're going to kind of call these OTK combo decks are actually going to be the control decks. And so to kind of put decks to the ideas, I think these things like Pirates, things like Draven Scion Vi, things like Elise Annie or Elise Gwen, these Decimate-based aggro decks. I think that's going to be our aggro decks. The thing that's going to kind of work on those a little bit will be the sort of mid-rangey style decks like Scouts, right? The kind of go wide parlance, if you will, as to where we're going to slow down your early game a little bit with challengers, and then we're going to get a fully wide board. Or if we say look at a deck like Aphelios Winding Light, right? To where we're going to stall a little bit with Mystic Shots, we're going to get a full board, and then we're going to close out the game with a Winding Light instead of a 4 Demacia. I think those are going to be our mid-rangey decks, and then kind of our ideas of what a control deck are going to be, or what we're starting to see out of this patch, is to where those singular go tall, build up a super unit style thing are going to be the control decks of the format. And so I kind of wanted to keep those things in mind. I think that Riot has kind of said, at least in this patch, that the aggro decks are fine, the mid-rangey decks are fine, and what we're now defining as control decks actually need a bit of tuning and a bit of slowing down. And I think that slowing down of these, I know it sounds so weird, but this slowing down of control decks is what is going to open up a bit of the aggro and mid-rangey pieces of the meta. And so, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump on into the patch notes. First and foremost, Alawi catching a nerf. Not a huge deal. I still think that Alawi in some sort, if not Alawi Bard, then Alawi Ionia, or some flavor of Alawi, is going to be the premier control deck. I don't think the nerf to Alawi is enough to push her out of the meta. That 1 point of health isn't a huge boon here, and I think she's still going to be quite strong. Now, the big weakness to Alawi was the reduction of Tentacle Smash. This is a kind of two-part nerf in that every Alawi deck always plays 3 copies of Tentacle Smash, and then it's also her flip ability. So her flip is much weaker now that Tentacle Smash only spawns 2 instead of 3. Again, I still think that these are going to be quite powerful. I think they still work, fantastically with Bard, even though we'll see a Bard nerf upcoming. But I do believe this is still the premier control deck of the format. But, with that kind of same idea that we were mentioning earlier, she's probably a turn or two slower now, right? We lose out on some of the slams from Tentacle Smash. That's going to be a little bit slower to level up a Lowy. Probably take her another full turn to level up before you get that big game-ending Tentacle in there. Could even perhaps see a push over to starting to include Nagakaboros. It's not that expensive. It costs 8, but if the game is going to switch from being like a turn 7, turn 8 kind of format to being a turn 8, turn 9 kind of format, then Nagakaboros probably has a place to where it can fit in. Next one on the list, Karma grows a bit of stats. I still don't think Karma fits in, right? If we're carrying the same concept of the control decks are Alawi, the control decks are Frozen Thralls. They just went on turn 9 now instead of turn 8. Karma doesn't fit in there being a turn 10 champion. And so I don't think these stats are the problem. I think the given speed of the control decks in the format is the problem. All right, on to the next one, Gnar. Kind of interesting. I didn't talk about Gnar and the Papercraft Dragon-based decks, but again, I think that they're going to be quite good. The Papercraft Dragon does catch a Narf. We'll catch it here in just a little bit, but Gnar, they keep inching back up into strength, and he's still quite fine and strong. I still think the strongest variation of Gnar will be with Papercraft Dragon, and we'll see if that's what comes into fruition in the upcoming format. In terms of Zillion, he has a new flip spell, very, very much stronger, very much stronger. Chrono Shift was just dog shit, right? And so this is actually kind of interesting in that, is it strong enough to push the Zillion, Time Bomb, Manifest decks up into the forefront with the careful preparation, really helping kick off those themes. I'll be interested to see how that pans out. That's not a deck that we play a lot of here on our channel, but it's definitely an upgrade to that deck in a patch to where the Zillion Time Bomb decks were not hurt in a format that's now about to get slower. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things potentially coming out of these Zillion Time Bomb decks, something to kind of keep watch of in the upcoming patch. Bard does catch a nerf. He doesn't start planting chimes until turn 3. I guess that's not entirely the truth. He doesn't start planting chimes until you have 3 mana gems. And so in the lands of Constructed, it's not until turn 3. In the lands of Path of Champions, it's going to be a little bit different since you tend to start with mana gems there. But I think it's fine. I think Bard is still quite strong. And I think Bard still carries this kind of idea of being... He's not quite the control deck champion. I think he was just, kind of a strong way to manage your Alawis. But I think Bard isn't going anywhere. He's just too strong as it is. And then the Birds and the Esmiths of the world are also exceptionally strong. And so you do lose out on those draws to where... you're like, LOL, I hit a unit on turn 2. It's like a bird on turn 1, double chime on turn 2. LOL, I'm very good at the game. Like, those draws are gone, and you're going to lose a percentage to or point from Bard's win rates, but still overall an exceptionally strong champion. Cosmic Binding catches a buff because Bard got nerfed. That's completely fine. And probably what are going to be the highest impact nerfs of the format are the changes to Kaisa. Kaisa's key spell in Second Skin moved from focus to slow, and then the supercharge now costs 4 mana. And so much in the same vein as Bard, I don't think Kaisa's going anywhere. I still think that she's just strong enough to hard carry a lot of games on her own. She's another champion that can really just grow as new cards are released, new keywords are planted out there. Kaisa is just one of these things that we're just going to have to evaluate every set and say, oh, cool, how much stronger did she just get, right? I think that she's always going to be a strong and worthwhile champion. And so these nerfs are big. Kaisa might be, a sub 50% win rate champion in the upcoming format. I don't think it's going to be the case. And even if she does, I think she's going to be one that kind of slowly climbs with every patch. And so, if she does fall to, say, being a 49% win rate champion because of these two nerfs. But then with each release of a new set, she picks up maybe like 0.5% or 1% of win rate. Then she's very quickly right back up to the top of the meta. And so I think she's still here to stay. Again, she might have been nerfed a little too hard to follow along now, but don't forget about her because she's certainly going to be coming back. Hate Spike now costs 1 mana. I don't think this is really enough. I mean, the card itself is good, but the current meta doesn't play to 2 damage removals like this well, right? Mystic Shot is fine because you can throw it at the face later on in the game. Hate Spike not being able to go face isn't made up enough with the abilities that it has. And so 1 mana is nice, but it needs something else in the Slay-based decks, and those being the kind of Kindred-based Slay decks that are really wanting these spell slay kind of things. It's just like the problem with the card wasn't the mana cost. The problem with the card was there weren't enough synergies to make it better than the other options that are available. All right, so one of the big ones here, Harsh Winds, dropped from 6 mana down to 5. Kind of interesting given their wording on it, although this is technically a champion buff because it's attached to Anivia. The main goal here is to give players some better tools to interacting with huge units. And that does kind of tie in to a bit of our history lesson in that a lot of the removal we're given in Runeterra just isn't permanent. And so while Harsh Winds can be used to shut down a Lowy for a turn, it's not a permanent answer. And I don't think Harsh Winds is what really answers that question, right? Harsh Winds tends to function better in these kind of mid-rangey, big dude style strategies to where, say, your Avarosian Hearthguard is hurt and another unit is facing a trade, and you get to trade your now 5 mana for your opponent's like 8 or 9 or 10 mana, right? The problems in the format aren't multiple big units right now. And I think that we're just going to be better served by playing Three Sisters, right? The situations to where we want that flash freeze, that big removal spell, aren't changing given the way that this patch has come together. I just can't imagine too many situations to where we would want to play Harsh Winds over Three Sisters or even play Harsh Winds over flash freeze. And so I think this is kind of an idea in the right direction that the temporary situational interactivity kind of cards should be cheaper. But I don't think that that's enough to push Harsh Winds into the territory to where it's better than Three Sisters. So the next one on the list, Blighted Ravine, basically no longer deals player damage, right? They changed the heal from 4 to 2, and then they changed the countdown to deal 2 to everything to just dealing 2 to units. Blighted Ravine's still going to be a powerful card. Doesn't deal that little bit of chip damage that was actually super relevant for the Frozen Thrall based decks, but I think this is still going to see a fair amount of play. And I don't think Frozen Thralls are going to be going anywhere. As we scroll on down to the Frozen Thrall, its countdown is changed from 8 to 9. I'm not a Frozen Thrall aficionado, a Lysandra Italia aficionado. I'm not certain at what point they say, okay, I don't want 1, I need 2, and I need to really manage my boards to where I'm getting 2 Frozen Thralls now in the place of 1, and at what point do I start playing Promising Future, the thing that makes 2 doubles your countdown or whatever the thing does. It makes 2 thralls instead of 1. And so, I don't think these decks are going anywhere. I think they're going to just adapt a little bit. But it does kind of play into that idea that I was saying earlier, as these are the control decks of the format. Instead of being a turn 8 deck, it's going to be a turn 9 deck now, or instead of being a turn 7 to 8 deck, it's going to be a turn 8 to 9 deck now. And just a little bit slower, but not going anywhere. On to this next set, Boom Baboon becomes a 2-1 instead of a 3-1. He's still going to be exceptionally good, although weaker. I can't entirely tell if Station Archivist is changing. The notes say that both Boom Baboon and Archivist add cards to hand without a suitable tax on their stats. But in terms of the patch notes, there's no suitable tax on Station Archivist stats. It just makes this note about shuffling those cards back into your deck. And so I'm not sure if she's still a 3-3 or not, but both of these cards still extremely playable. I think this is actually kind of a nice boost in that I think the decks that really want cards like Boom Baboon are still okay. Our Draven Scions and our Aphelios Winding Lights of the world, even the things like Yordles and Arms, still quite happy to have this kind of card generation thing going, but the more control-y decks aren't as happy about this. Losing out on the stats from the Archivist doesn't feel nearly as good. Up to the next one, Ravenbloom Conservatory now count down to 12 instead of 10. Same deal. It's going to take you a turn later to get your Tybalak, which is in turn going to take you a turn later to get a Riptide Rex kill. I still think we're in this space as to where this kills on, turn 9, and why are you going to play a Karma turn 10 or turn 11 deck when you can just play the Conservatory deck that kills on 9? And so, again, format's a little bit slower, but not going anywhere. Cadrigen caught some kind of update. I don't know. I read this like 8 times. I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter. This isn't worthwhile in the format, right? What we've always seen are these expensive cards have to have Overwhelm or Elusive or some kind of game-ending thing, and giving Unit 1/1 and Challenger isn't a big game ender. Don't expect too much out of Cadrigen. Next one, Mark of the Storm now does 3 damage instead of 2. This is pretty huge. That has always been the break point in the format, is having 3 health. 3 health going up to 4 was pretty big, but 3 health going down to 2 health wasn't as big of a deal. It's just because everything dealt 3 damage. But now with Mark of the Storm dealing 3, it gets the opportunity to clear out kind of all of those bread and butter units that it couldn't do so in the past. This is the one that strikes me as the most potentially impactful change of the format. This is extremely, extremely powerful moving up to 3. Riot has made a bunch of changes to just recall-based stuff, but I'm immediately drawn to the Kennen Ezreal style decks, and now them just having a shitload more power, and that the Mark kills basically every relevant unit in the format. And so, again, it's not the style of deck I like to play. It's not something I have a lot of experience with because we're playing aggro decks all the time and we aren't playing these stupid combo decks. But this is definitely one that I think we're immediately going to see a big change, and I think we're going to see a bunch of Kennen running around, given that this kind of reusable removal spell is so strong. Okay, so Starbone changes. You no longer have to behold a messenger. You now just have to behold a celestial. And this one has a lot of potential power. I don't think we're to the point yet to where Riot mentions little celestials, medium celestials, big celestials, and they're kind of supporting each of them to some degree. I don't think the support for little celestials is there yet, but we're getting close. And Starbone is a big fuel to that fire, if you will, and that really generating these bonuses to all of those cheap plays, your ability to spew out those cheap plays, are just like a card generator or two away from being a real thing. And so I don't think this is going to have a big impact now, but as Little Celestial sees more support in the future, this is definitely going to be the cornerstone to that style of deck. A little further down, Bloody Business now has Reputation 2. And so if you hit Reputation, it costs 2 mana instead of 4. It's fine. It's not enough to make me want to play a Reputation deck, but it does have a bit of niche power in those style of decks. And so, again, that's another kind of concept that just needs fleshed out a little bit more. Doesn't have the density of cards that it really needs to completely pop off, but having some minor upgrades like this don't hurt. Star Shaping back to healing 5 instead of 4, fine. I don't think we're quite yet to that world to where the heal is that super important, and you have to kind of stop to consider what the heal is good against, right? This was initially nerfed back in the time to when like Pirates was the kind of big and core aggro deck to the format, and then there weren't really any of these big soul-crushing, overwhelming style control decks being the closers. And Star Shaping just doesn't do anything against those, right? If we're attacking with 40 power Overwhelm, nobody cares how much health you gain. This only matters in terms of playing, say, like Decimate decks. And so I think this is going to be, I should say, I think it would be relevant in terms of, I think that, say, like Pirates is about to come back into the meta, but given the way a lot of the decks function in the format, I don't think it's going to be enough, right? Because this just isn't good enough against the big overwhelm strategies. And so maybe it'll be fringe playable in best of 3, but again, like, why would you play a turn 11 deck when you could play a turn 9 control deck? And I don't think this really fits the bill there. On to the next bit, we have a big upgrade to a lot of the recall cards. I think all of these are still garbage. I don't have too much desire to play any of these. Impact is not Overwhelm, right? And so without Mass of the Crashing Thunder or Stormcloud having Overwhelm, these just don't do enough. Your opponent just blocks and takes a point of damage. You really have to look to Overwhelm for these big game enders and game closers. On to the next one. Dust Petal Dust now hits everything and not just units. Never realized that was a thing. I don't know. I just never realized the Dust Petal Dust didn't cheapen up Pale Cascade. It does now. Good job. Next one with the Stage Hand. He has reduced down to 2 health, which, kind of makes sense. I guess the idea that this should be a Mystic Shottable unit is okay. I did often wonder why this thing had 4 health, and it didn't really make sense to me. And so I guess taking a slight tick to the survivability of these units is fine. I don't know how often it was ever relevant, but it's probably fair. So, Defiant Dance nerfed up to 5 mana instead of 4. I think this is probably necessary. I have a sneaking suspicion that one of the most popular decks as the patch comes out is just going to be tokens, and so hitting Defiant Dance up front is pretty good. No problems there. Again, the Traveler catches an upgrade. Why are we playing turn 9 or turn 10 and 11 winning decks instead of playing 8 and 9 decks? The same thing applies to the Traveler. I don't want to be playing Celestials right now. Squeaker, he's going to get there eventually, man. He's eventually going to be OP. I think the Mecha Yordles deck is good. Not top of the meta, but it's quietly, kind of carving out a space. I've dabbled a bit with the Mecha Yordle strategies and with the Rumble strategies. The Boom Baboon decks are all in all pretty powerful, but there's better Boom Baboon decks than than Rumble. And so this might have some best of 3 relevance, but for the Mecha Yordle thing to really pop off, it needs a little bit more support to take it out of the fringe zone. All right, Vandal City Mayor, up to 3 health. I think this is fine. I don't see too many problems with this. I think this is a little scary in terms that he does more than just generate a card. But I feel like if this turns out to be too much, Riot will just send him right back down to 2. And so I do really like the amount of navigating that Riot's doing with these nerfs. If a change like Star Shaping needs to go back, they're willing to do it. And so I really like the amount of work that they're putting into all of these. Ancient Hourglass up to 3, that's fine. Does hurt some of these Zillion-based, or not the Zillion, these Zerath-based strategies, but not too upsetting at the end of the day, and I really like seeing their notes attached to it, right? Shurimo is not intended to be the premier unit protection region, and so let's define where they belong a little bit better. Very, very good, very strong. All right, Neverglade Collector catches a point of health. This was a Expedition Superstar, not so much for Constructed. I don't know what stat line this would have to have for me to be interested. These 5 mana and 6 mana and 7 mana units need to just end the game as soon as they come down, and so this would need to be like a 5-6 or so for me to even be interested. So without some kind of combo to fuel the Collector, I just don't think he's going to be good enough. Up next with the Winding Light, no longer has Overwhelm. This is going to stop a lot of the OTKs coming out of the Aphelios decks. They're going to be much slower. The 6 Overwhelm was actually pretty huge. And so I'm not sure if the Aphelios decks will kind of pivot back to the kind of fairy style that could generate Papercraft Dragons, or if they'll stick with the Winding Light, just be a little bit slower. But this is a major nerf, losing out on this damage, which would essentially be like 4 or 5 or 6 actual 6 damage coming in on a given turn. Now that you're counting on your small units to close out the game, going to be much tougher to do. Papercraft Dragon, now a turn slower, and I think this is fine. If all of the other control decks are slowing down a turn, if we're going to call these go tall numbers control decks, at least in terms of, say, like the Gnar deck, then I think it's fine, right? The kind of curve that we used to do with this was we would play Papercraft Dragon on turn 5, right? So you played on turn 6. So on turn 5, you play your Ruin Runner or your Gnar or whoever. You have 3 spell mana banked up. You go into turn 6. Now on turn 6, you attach the Papercraft Dragon. That leaves you with 4 mana, and you're now ready to play a Rite of Negation or something. And those plays, take a full 2 turns to pull off now, but I still think that the OTKs are going to be here, and instead of going for Gnar or Renekton-based ones, we may just find ourselves switching back to playing Fizz Riven. Battle Bonds, Burst Spell now, well worth it. I mean, 8 stats for 4 mana is pretty good. I'm not sure what kind of Targon deck actually wants this, but it's certainly a relevant card now. The +2/+2 is permanent, right? This is now it looks like a combat trick. It's easy to think that combat tricks lose out on that bonus, but this is a permanent +2/+2 to 2 allies, and so not a bad deal. It's just going to be finding a home, whether or not that's Pantheon or Taric or needing additional Fated units. I don't have the answers right now, but definitely a relevant upgrade. Not a relevant upgrade, though. Bienemone catching a point of health and Scarmaiden Reaver catching a point of health. Could not care less about either of these. If I was going to make a eat my hat style statement, I would say that Bienemone or Scarmaiden Reaver seeing constructed play would be that statement. Not eating a fucking hat or a sock, though, so we'll leave that be there. And then the last change, Twisted Catalyzer, up to 3 attack, back from 2. Again, I think this is okay. I'm not entirely sure at what point Darkness gets the kills. This doesn't really affect how fast they kill. Yes, it does make their Darknesses deal more damage, but the question is going to be, is Darkness a turn 9 deck, right? If Darkness can kill on turn 9, it'll probably come back into the meta. If it can't win on turn 9, then it's just going to fall by the wayside from the Alawi and the Frozen Thrall-based decks. Otherwise, not too much going on here. Here's some Seasonals gear that we're about to pick up. The new cards will be revealed today as this video comes out on the 17th of August. We'll start previewing those in our upcoming work. And I don't think I saw anything in the bug fixes that would be considered relevant. One last thing I did want to touch on here before we let you go with the video is I wanted to pull up a Ruben Zoo comment on Twitter. I think that's pretty relevant here in terms of the patch notes and what we'll see in the future. So let's get that up. And so if you want to swing over to the Twitter, I mean, the only way I know how to find this is I do follow Ruben Zoo on the Yell Twitter. I think this has been posted to Reddit as well, but you can go to the twitter.com/RubenZoo. He is currently his top post, and he talks about what they're looking to do in terms of balance in regards to these patches. He is the, it says over here at the right, game designer, make games, Pro Tour champ and stuff. I think his title is like the balance lead. But, as we see with this patch, there's a lot of changes. He's talking about what he expects to see with the patch notes in the upcoming future. I'm not going to read through this in its entirety. You can read on your own. But he talks about the new meta loop to where they want to have big changes whenever a big patch hits. So once a month, we should be seeing the big hits, whether or not that is the new card release or the mid-season balance patch. You expect to see a lot of big shakeups. Their idea isn't to have a balanced meta to where, Bard is a little bit weaker, Kai'Sa is a little bit weaker, whatever is 48% is a little bit better now. They're looking for big shakeups. They're looking to make new metas each month and have some big changes, and ideally bringing decks from the nowhere land up to the forefront. And so I would expect to see more changes along the lines of here, where Kennen and all of these recall cards just got updated. Seeing stuff like this as to where something isn't seeing play, updating it to see more play. And in terms of me, I think this whole idea here is pretty great. As I used to play tons and tons of Hearthstone. Basically, like month 1, it was super fun, and then they were on a 4-month release schedule. I think it's different now, but back when I was into it, it was a 4-month release schedule. Like the first month would be super fun. You would play it and then have a great time. Month 2, you would just kind of do it, but it was kind of old because the meta was super stale. At the beginning of month 3, they would put out like some minor balance changes to like 5 or 6 cards. cool, we'll play the new meta for a bit, and then month 4 is fucking boring. You just played until you hit legend and quit. If you didn't have aspirations to grow into a top tier tournament player, a top tier ladder grinder, then there was just no real reason to play. And I really like this idea of making big shakeups every month. So that the meta completely changes and we have a lot of fun things to do and explore instead of just playing Kaisa as a 55% win rate deck for a month, and then her catching a minor nerf into a 53% win rate deck, and then her catching a minor nerf into a 51% win rate deck, and just dealing with that shit for 3 months in a row. Everyone has their own take on that kind of idea. I think it's great to make that not be a thing. Not necessarily nerf her into oblivion, but really shake up the meta with all of these changes. So we have basically a new format every month. And so that is it. That is our patch note review. Agree or disagree with anything we have, our wonderful history, our analysis of the cards, or what's upcoming in the future, be sure to let us know down in the comments. And otherwise, that will do it for us today. And so, hope everyone enjoyed the video. Maybe learned a thing or two along the way and had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.